welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at BTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is going to be what has been happening with regards to the US elections, and of course, the developing situation in light of now the new presidential nominee from the Democrat side, and of course, Mr. Donald Trump from the Republican side. It has been a very eventful election so far, but we've also, of course, seen that now the dynamic has shifted between the two people, and of course, what sorts of aspects are now going to be seen in the debates that follow are going to be important, especially in terms of how the voters' opinion is then decided. While many, of course, argue that the Democrats and the Republicans will be going for their own respective candidates, and it is them that these two candidates will be targeting. It is, of course, interesting to see what sort of interactions will take place between the two, including what Mr. Donald Trump has said on his social media accounts, calling Ms. Kamala Harris crazy with regards to the recent bill that he has said is going to increase massive spending and cause inflation. This is important, especially in terms of what this has led to previously as well, in terms of the criticism that Mr. Joe Biden has also received, and how likely will this then be defended by Ms. Kamala Harris. Of course, among other aspects, it's going to be also important to see how these two fare in their own respective domains, and what sort of issues and areas will then be risen as we follow the US presidential elections. Our next topic is also going to be taking a look at what is happening around the world, including, of course, the genocide that continues for many, many months. We've seen, of course, that no matter what and no matter which platform declares so, the genocide still continues, and there is no stopping the Israeli occupation forces. At the same time, there's also concerns with regards to whether or not there can be a potential escalation of this violence to an all-out war, particularly when we talk about Hezbollah. And then, of course, with the way that we've seen Israel and Hezbollah being involved in fighting for quite some time now. We've also seen that there has been a recent attack on the Israel-occupied Golan Heights. Whether or not that, of course, is something that Hezbollah is responsible for, it has not, of course, claimed responsibility, but it will, of course, be important to see whether or not this actually is something that escalates over the borders and other countries are then involved in all-out conflict. We've seen previous attempts at ceasefire and of peace talks not being successful in actually making sure that this does happen, with, of course, the genocide in Gaza being an important prerequisite for it to stop. But we've also seen that while the two sides have said that they are willing to engage in a stoppage of fighting, there is also, of course, the fact that they both say they are ready to engage as well. So we're going to be seeing what sort of aspects are important, particularly when we talk about the future of whether or not there are serious concerns for the world. That's what we're going to be looking at in our second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Farrukh K.Pitafi and Faisal. And for our first segment with regards to the US presidential elections, we've been joined by Dr. Awais, who's associate professor at Lamar University, Texas. We've also been joined by Mr. Ather H, Tirmizi, senior political analyst from the US. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. Dr. Awais, I'm going to start with you in terms of what you have observed, particularly when we've seen Ms. Kamala Harris join the presidential race up till now, with the way that has impacted the dynamic of the US elections, and what sort of influence has that caused, particularly when we talk about the voters. As we know, of course, many have also are also of the opinion that it's both the Democrats and the Republicans that are going to be voting for their own respective candidates, and that is going to be the focus of these two candidates as well. But what sort of observations do you have in terms of any difference that you see now that Ms. Harris is also in the race?
Thank you for having me. It's an interesting comparison to start with. When we last spoke, up till that point, Joe Biden was still adamant that he'll be in the race and he is not going to withdraw. Now that he has withdrawn, the fog that was on his entire campaign and the doubts that were within the party ranks on Joe Biden's ability to defeat Donald Trump or remain in the White House as an active president for 4 years in case he goes on to win have cleared. That clarity has kind of rubbed on to the Democratic voters, and we have seen that being reflected in the polls, that gap between Kamala Harris as the potential nominee of the Democratic Party and Donald Trump is kind of narrowing of all places in the four battleground states. In fact, the new Fox News poll just yesterday came out that caused a sort of frenzy in the Republican ranks, and Donald Trump went on a posting rampage on his Truth Social website where he challenged the numbers. There is an alleged audio leak audio leak of JD Vance where he is saying that the way we were trying to target Joe Biden, we can't do that with Kamala Harris. And I think that's the most important point when we are comparing the change in this situation, because the entire Republican campaign and Trump rhetoric was built around the frailty of Joe Biden, that he can't comprehend things, he is unable to articulate himself. Now, with Kamala Harris, all that is gone. And I think she is very smartly pitching herself as a prosecutor, which has been her forte all her life. She was California's attorney general, and she understands the dynamics of these felony charges on Donald Trump, and she can give a fitting response. So it will not be able. I think Republican Party needs to re-strategize. They are still trying to think how they can target her, because if they target her past as a woman, because I have also seen a kind of smear campaign against her that she was a gold digger. Her political achievements are not her own achievements and things like that. But that again is in bad taste even for those voters who are sitting on the fence right now. So right now, I think there is clarity that has resulted in a certain kind of pep in the Democratic ranks, and Republicans also can't take it for granted as they were perhaps a couple of weeks ago.
Right, absolutely. And Mr. Ather, I want your take on this as well, particularly when we talk about the kind of statements that are being made for Ms. Kamala Harris. And of course, Mr. Trump, of course, has also said a few things on the social media account. He's called her crazy as well. And he has a record previously as well of engaging in such wordings or in such personal attacks. And of course, when we talk about Joe Biden and the way that their strategy was centered around, as Dr. Awais was talking about, his age, and that obviously helped them in the situation. But now that this new candidate is also emerging, will we be seeing more of that, and whether or not that will actually help in garnering the kinds of votes and Republican support that Mrs. Trump is looking for?
So first of all, Sana, thank you very much for having me. So I want to come to everybody on the panel and your audience. I think to what Dr. Saleem just mentioned, absolutely all those points are correct in terms of what Republicans are doing to the smear campaign, what their campaign was for President Joe Biden. Now they have to re-strategize. But the main problem in the United States, regardless of the parties, regardless of this smear campaign, because look, that's President Donald Trump is forte, right? That's his MO. When he was running in 2016, that was his MO. When he was running in 2020, that was his MO. And now in 2024, that is his MO. I think that's just a personality thing for President Trump. That's what he does. He personally attacks, and to his base, they enjoy it. They feel like he's a fighter, and that actually energizes his base that he's fighting. Regardless of Vice President Harris's track record as the senator, as in California, and now as vice president under Biden's administration, Americans when you tune out all the noise. And again, I always say that all these rhetoric and all that is good for people who are in political circles. An average American, what they look is, how much is I'm paying for my gas? How much is my mortgage? What is the rate I'm paying? What is my rent? Can I afford the groceries? An average American just care for that. And the challenge with the Biden campaign, I think, was, and now we have to see what's going to happen with VP Harris's campaign, is that how the narrative is going to be about an average American. Now, they are banking on, of course, the identity politics, right? Which has been their, safe zone because they can get the progressive voters out and energize them. They can, up until 2020, energize Muslim Americans, which I'm not sure with last 7, 8 months of Gaza war that they really can. And a lot of Muslim Americans have left Democratic Party because of that. Democratic Party's push on LGBTQ and trans issues have pushed a lot of Latino voters who are particularly conservative to Republican fold. Asian American, there was such a spike after COVID in Asian American hate, and in major cities like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, those cities, they saw that there was an anti-police sentiment, so Asian Americans had switched to Republican Party also because they don't want defund the police narrative when the community is being targeted. So when you now throw everything in mix, of course, Republican Party has to strategize, like Professor Saleem said, how they're gonna go after VP Harris, because their whole strategy was that Biden is not capable. Now they cannot say that about VP Harris, absolutely. But even then, the issues remain the same for an average American. And the challenge for Democratic Party is that unless they talk about the economy for an average person, let's say half of the Americans are not invested in the stock market. So you cannot go back and say the stock market has been highest it has been, because 52% of the American invest, 48% of Americans are not even invested. So they're not seeing the direct benefit into their retirement funds and their investments. So how do you reach out to those 48% of Americans? And those are, your bread and butter issues, your economy issues. And unless Democrats really start targeting, and kudos to VP Harris's campaign, that they hold in $200 million since she announced, and the Democratic Party said that they have another $350 million in commitments. So if they can pull $500 million in commitments and funding within a week, that really does show the strong desire for Democrats. But again, I think the challenge for America right now is an average person's kitchen issues, right? If you are sitting on the kitchen cabinet talking to your family and you're worried about how you're going to pay your rent or mortgage, how you're going to pay your car payments, how much expensive the groceries are, and if you have to pick between any of those, regardless of the rhetoric that Trump or Harris may talk about, regardless of the attacks that they may come up with, I think an average American voter really cares about how it's impacted, because after COVID, we have seen record inflation. And I think until that is discussed from both campaigns, you can have, the Muslim Americans and the Hispanic American, African American, which is a huge voting bloc. You can talk to those about their issues like healthcare, like accessibility, like economy, like immigration. But you have to have a much wider net to cast all of those votes under.
Yeah, rightly pointed out, Ather Saab, and just wanted to go towards Dr. Awais once more, and it is related to, of course, rightly highlighted the points about the inflation, because these are the things which are being highlighted by both of the candidates as well. But Dr. Awais, when we talk about the foreign policy, preferences of Democrats and of Republicans, it is seen that Republicans, they believe, especially with the Trump, they believe in quick solutions to the wars, especially when we talk about the Middle Eastern war, when we talk about the European war. Of course, Ukraine war is going on. But if we talk about Biden's administration, they were in favor of a war that is lingered on, so that they can keep on igniting the furnace of their military equipments, and they can keep on sending them to their desired buyers, so that they can, of course, run their economy in that context as well. In both senses, of course, now we have Kamala Harris. How do you see Kamala Harris? Would she be someone who believes in prolonged wars so that their economy can run on the basis of wars elsewhere in the world, or she would be more like Trump, seeking quick solutions, geopolitical solutions, so that war ends?
And Dr. Awais, we've of course seen that foreign policy hasn't really impacted voter decisions in the US. Will Gaza be any different?
Let me also add a helping to your plate, Dr. Saab, because we are talking about President Biden was also mentioned. And at this moment, while he might be a lame duck president, but he has been given a lot of powers because of Supreme Court's recent judgment. So I wanted you to also comment on his role in the campaign, especially now that he doesn't have anything to lose, particularly his, this push for Supreme Court reform. Do you think that it is going to have any kind of impact at all on the election debates?
Well, let me approach that one by one. Last question first. Ever since Joe Biden took this decision, there has been an outpouring of emotion from the Democratic voters and the media, and it seems that everything that was being pointed at him as far as his foreign policy or economy or health was concerned, everything has been pushed behind the wall, and he is being painted as the great statesman who is now going into sort of retirement or things like that. I don't think that within the 5 months that he has available till he leaves the White House, he'll be able to do any radical changes to Supreme Court or as far as economy or foreign policy is concerned. Although he might want to end up in a way that he leaves a legacy for people to kind of chew on, whether it will be more rhetorical or there will be some practical steps, that has to be seen. I am not very hopeful. Now, coming to Kamala Harris and her stance on foreign policy issues, well, currently these two wars that you have mentioned, those are closely tied to the economic mess that we have seen in this country. And that is not just recent, it has lingered on for almost 2 decades now, when the US went into Afghanistan and Iraq. And Trump's rise in politics and what we saw in those 4 years was a direct result of that, because people were kind of sick and tired of the traditional kind of politics and those wars, and they wanted somebody who was outside the system and could probably fix the system and particularly economy. And 4 years down the road, that is more of an issue now. All the polls that we are seeing these days, economy is the biggest issue for the US voters across the aisle. Ather very rightly pointed out that there is record inflation, and neither Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump have been able to put a concrete roadmap in front of their potential voters that how they are going to address this. There is all talk and bluster, but no strategy as such. Regarding foreign policy, I find contradictions in both camps. Whereas Donald Trump has mentioned that he'll issue orders to immediately withdraw forces and bring the war in Ukraine to an end. The Gaza conflict is completely absent from their campaign speeches or interviews. They are not even talking about that. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is trying to distance herself from what we saw Joe Biden doing. And there is a reason behind that, because ever since she was nominated and endorsed by Joe Biden, she has received support from the left-leaning Democrats like AOC and Rashida Tlaib. She has received endorsements from minority groups, particularly women. And if she plays the game of optics well, like she was absent from Netanyahu's House speech, she, in the statement that she released afterwards, words were very carefully chosen where she called for an end to the conflict and things like that. So I think that's
Very
what she
clever.
is going to do for the next 3 months because she wants all these groups, because there is a very strong sentiment against Gaza conflict within the US. We saw what happened in the US educational institutions not so long ago. So, minority groups, immigrants, youngsters, left leaning groups, all of them want this conflict to end. All of them want Israel's genocide to come to an end. So she would want them to rally behind her. What she does when she is actually in the White House, if that happens, again, I am not too hopeful that she'll be able to go the entire length to bring Israel to change its course, but maybe a ceasefire will be a good starting point.
Right. Mr. Ather, you earlier also spoke about inflation and, of course, the issues that matter to the American public. And, of course, the American Rescue Plan is one of the things that Ms. Harris has just been criticized about by Mr. Trump. And we've seen that previously Joe Biden was also criticized about this, that it added a lot to the inflation. How well do you think this is going to go down when we talk about what impacts the general public and whether or not this is also something that the people will be looking at?
And by the way, allow me to actually add to this question because you brought up the question, the issue of inflation. And I was thinking, the pundits have been predicting some kind of recession, but it is not happening. Actually, there is inflation. And many people have attributed many things for that. For example, there were handouts during Biden administration's time when there was COVID. But then there was also there were also handouts during President Trump's time as well. So how can we be sure which one actually caused all the inflation?
So here is a major problem. We can get into the semantics of policies, right? And I'll tell you, during the COVID, United States government between President Biden and President Trump printed $6 trillion just for handouts. And that added to the national debt. And $6 trillion in like a year and a half time or a year's time is a lot of money to be printed. Now, the United States can do that. And they were giving $1,000 to people, totaling about $200 billion. US banks and all that, they got about $1.78 trillion. Then another $3 trillion were printed to invest into all the institutions in Wall Street. So $6 trillion, of course, when it gets injected, it gets, rightfully so, you're going to get the inflation. But the problem is that if you ask an average American who printed how much money, nobody has any idea, right? So the problem is that Biden presidency has the incumbency, right? They will say to an average voter, they'll say, like, what did you do for it? Doesn't matter who printed, doesn't matter when was it printed, doesn't matter what was the cause, what is the challenge? Now, what President Trump has been really good at throughout his political career is that he makes these claims, and he makes these claims that are larger than life. We'll build the wall and Mexico will pay for it. Of course, it's impossible, but he makes that claim. Then he says, on first day in the office, I'll stop Ukraine war because it's wasting U.S. money, $200 billion only go down the drain, right? And he has such clear-cut claims that people at least say, okay, this guy sounds like he has a plan. Whether it comes to fruition or not, people on the campaign side say, what is your plan? When it comes to Biden's campaign, and now we have to see VP Harris's campaign, the plans are, even if it's a rhetoric, even if it's campaign and political rhetoric, those are not there. And what voter wants to hear is a leader who gets ahead of the problem, at least in talking points. So you are not going to turn around and say, well, when we get to the office, we're going to look at it and we have to get all the parties on table and we have to have peace in the world. That's a very vague message. Versus Trump comes and it's the most outlandish claim that first day in the office, I'll stop the Russian-Ukraine war. First day, right? And he says it so clearly that people say, oh, that's great. So I think the challenge with inflation is that who's going to come? And Trump's message is that you're going to be more prosper under me. We're going to stop the inflation, and we're going to make sure that we are not wasting money. And it's a simple, short, and I think that's the advantage that President Trump had all this time, that he talks like an average person. So an average person understand, he doesn't have an elitist mindset. He talks to a guy who's a plumber or is a mechanic and owns an auto body shop. They listen to him and they say, "Oh yeah, this guy makes sense." VP Harris, it's her first time presidential campaign. Um, Campaigns are campaigns. Governance is completely different. The problem is going to be when people say, okay, what you going to do with inflation? Trump can say, I wasn't in the office for the last 4 years, so I can't help you. With VP Harris, they're going to say, well, your administration was in charge for the last 3.5 years. How come you haven't done what you are telling that you're going to do once you become the president? An average voter in America just wants to understand simplicity of the message. And once it gets convoluted, or when it sounds a little bit elitist or segregated, then it becomes challenging, because Democratic Party has that big tent party issue, that they have extremely conservative Democrats and then Democrats like AOC. And there's an impossibility to put everybody under that tent and to make everybody happy.
Ather, a very quick question. But you have rightly pointed out about the obviously average American citizen. But earlier, Dr. Awais highlighted a very excellent point, and that was related to, of course, the way Biden administration handled the protesters, the students, and of course the youthful people. They were part of the these protests. Of course, they will be voting as well. And it is said that a large number of voters is, of course, the youthful voters, talking about the voters below 45. Of course, they are gutted with the kind of hard-handedness which they were dealt with by the Biden administration. Do you see that kind of factor as well playing a role in these elections? And them voters, they can be considered as obviously non-average voters, but can they be attracted towards Trump?
No.
Given
No.
that you were asked to actually give a brief comment on this issue, I hope that you I know that you're going to actually be briefer than the question, but I wanted to add one more factor to the question, and that was one of the concerns that seemed to be actually on top of American minds, and that is immigrant crime or the southern border. Could you also comment on that as well?
Absolutely. So let me start with the election of young voters, right? I have spoken to so many young Muslim voters, and Democrats going to have this challenge. They're saying we're going to vote for Jill Stein. That's a big challenge. On Republican side, there is no second candidate. They're going to vote for Trump, and that's it. In Democrat side, young Muslims are going to write in Jill Stein if she's not on the ballot. And in places like Michigan, so I'll give you an example. Michigan, Trump carried Michigan by 150,000 votes. I think Biden carried Michigan in 2020 by 120,000 votes. They just had primary, and Michigan, which is the largest Arab population in the United States, Michigan, 100,000 voters voted uncommitted. That's a big problem. And a state that you need 100,000, 150,000 to win, if 100,000 voters vote for Jill Stein, you lose Michigan, right? So Democrats don't win Michigan, or maybe lose Michigan because they will have more Republican voters voted for Donald Trump. So they win that state. And young Muslim voters are not happy with either the Democratic or the Republican Party. That's young Muslims and a lot of young voters, right? So there's a whole movement for Jill Stein. So that's Democratic issue. Second thing, with the southern border and crimes, the challenge has been that because she was the Attorney General of California and crimes have been rampant in California, like San Francisco and Los Angeles, unfortunately, Republican campaigns and President Trump's campaign is going to play that. They're going to say our southern border, especially in California, which is directly a border state to Mexico, they have criminals let loose, and we see the economic impact. For example, in New York City, large retail chains are closing and shutting down. For example, in New York City's district attorney, they have said that they're not even going to prosecute anybody that steals less than $999. So people are going out stealing and they're not getting prosecuted. It has created a huge, huge challenge. And an average New Yorker sees this because when these stores leave, these big chains leave, they not only the crime part of it, the economic impact that New York is seeing, who may be employed at a large pharmacy chain. Now that large pharmacy chain is leaving New York City because of the crimes. They're definitely an economic impact in addition to just the criminal element. And these are the challenges Democrats have to come around because Republican message is very simple: border control, better economy, and gun rights. Those are like
Right.
three messages that Republicans are hammering.
Right. Dr. Awais, I also want your take on other important issues that have been raised by one of the first speeches by Ms. Kamala, and she also talked about, of course, the issue with regards to assault rifles and a ban on these rifles, and then, of course, abortion, which is one of the major issues for the Democrats as well. What do you think will be the way forward when we talk about these particular issues as well, in line with the others that we have spoken about, and whether or not that's actually going to gather the swing votes that we're talking about?
And Dr. Awais, does the Obama factor still plays a key role in the elections because he obviously is out there supporting Kamala?
Well, Obama factor does play a very important role. It was a decisive factor in making Joe Biden withdraw from the race because he was not behind the scenes. He was not backing him as he was expected to do because Biden was his vice president for 8 years and supposed to be a sort of mentor for him throughout his political career. But politics, as we all know, is a heartless game. Now coming to the issues like abortion and gun control and immigration reforms, make no mistake, these issues are very divisive in US politics and have been for decades. There is no easy solution to these issues, whether one party is in the White House or the other. We have seen Democrats calling for gun reforms, advocating gun reforms, advocating for abortion rights and everything. But uh, uh, it has been challenged by Republicans. Gun control is even being refuted by Republicans. After the recent assassination attempt on Donald Trump, they are saying that no, it was the fault of the Secret Service. It does not mean that we should be having gun control or legislation on that. There are billions of lobbying dollars at stake when it comes to this, when it comes to these issues and potential legislation. So I don't see either side kind of budging from where they are right now because they need to keep their loyal voter base loyal to them. The only tipping point is how the voter sitting on the fence in swing states sees this issue. And that is where I see the role of minority groups and particularly immigrants tipping the scale one way or the other in these elections. Uh, because even for those voters who might have voted against Donald Trump, in 2020 because it was in the middle of the COVID cycle. Economy had kind of come to a standstill. Now, in these 3.5 years of the Democratic presidency, they have seen the impact of inflation and everything, and they need to decide accordingly. But on the other hand, Republicans are known to be anti-immigration, care the Council of the Islamic Organization in the US just recently compiled a report that there has been a 70% spike in Islamophobic incidents within the US compared to 2023 after the Gaza conflict started. So that's another issue for the immigrants and minority groups to account for, whether they want to go back to the Trump presidency that kind of let this genie out of the bottle in his first tenure. So there is no easy solution, like I said, and there is no easy answer for the voters right now. It just depends where they lean more on the day of when they go to the polling station.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Awais, Saleem, and Mr. Ather Tirmizi for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. When we talk about these issues, Farrukh, will it boil down to the rhetoric that we're just seeing coming from these candidates, or will be people looking for actual plans of action?
Right. I think that both parties have their platforms, and they have actually been highlighting that for quite some time. What changes now is because there has been a visible change of ticket in the ticket of Democrats. Because of that, of course, the platform might need updating. There was fear that because of fundings and all those issues, big business might be able to dictate their terms because they were cutting all the funds. And given that now Kamala Harris is on top of the ticket, immediately what we saw was that small ticket, contributions. She has been able to earn more than 200 million within no time. So that actually speaks to how popular she is, and she is a brilliant candidate. We'll still have to see how the numbers actually pan out, because in front of me is RCP's ratings or their averages, and we are exactly at the same place where President Biden was standing. So with Kamala Harris, the difference between the two is 1.9% towards Trump, right? What has changed is the spirit in the battleground states. But there is a problem with these numbers. When you keep on looking at these numbers, you think that there is nothing fishy going on. But we have seen that there was a hectic of lobbying to get rid of President Biden. It was by lobbying the media, by lobbying the Congress, and by lobbying even the polling agencies, because they are a part of media. And immediately after that, we saw a surge as well. I tell you another example of what is happening now. Now Congress is being, lobbied to convince Trump to get rid of J.D. Vance. He might be whatever he is, but his numbers are shown to be tanking, beyond any imagination. Now, if you go to New York Times bestseller list, and right now, if you look at non-fiction, bestsellers among, e-book readers and paperback, #1 book is J.D. Vance's book. When you go to audible.com, look at what audiobook is being listened to in the non-fiction category, you will see that it is J.D. Vance's book. When you go to Netflix America, and you see that his movie is actually really doing well there after so many years. So the point is that media is actually overtaken by certain interests, and they're lobbying. They effectively did it with Biden. Now they want to get rid of J.D. Vance. So that lobbying will continue. That's why we cannot trust these numbers. But I hope that in coming days, the debates and discussions will be defined by what actually comes up in the polls.
Absolutely. We'll now be moving on to our next segment that takes a look at what is going on in Gaza, and of course whether or not there is a possibility of this escalating with reference to Israel and Hezbollah. And Faisal, I'll take your perspective first, especially when we talk about this ongoing genocide. We've seen that despite everything, there is no stopping Israeli forces. And at the same time, of course, concerns are being raised of escalation. And then, of course, when we take a look at both these sides, while there is certain rhetoric of possibility of peace, there's also the rhetoric that they are ready to fight and they're ready to engage, and that they will not stop. And so I want your perspective then on what exactly is the possibility of this actually escalating, where this is not just then limited to what is going on in Gaza or Israel, but also outside of this.
Yeah, so now obviously when we see what Israel has been doing in Gaza, of course, it's nearly a year now, only 3 months left to October was the time when they actually started this menace, and they have been going on since then. And we saw that there was support from Hezbollah, from Lebanon side, and that support is only on the basis of course, they have always sided with Palestine, sided with Gaza, especially Hamas, they have sided with that. And if we see the whole pattern, they have been, of course, engaging Israel from behind, and that engagement, of course, saw till now the more than 50 Israelis they've been killed, including their soldiers, IDF soldiers. And if we talk about the way sort of Israel carried out activities within Lebanon, they have killed more than 450 people in Lebanon itself. And now, just before the program started, I've been going through that the fresh bombings they've been carried out in Beirut. We remember in Beirut, Beirut was almost grounded by Israel bombings back in days as well, and now they are bombing it again once more, and this would of course escalate the things in the Middle East once more. But why they are doing it right now? It seems as if the sort of reins of the war, they are out of the hands of Netanyahu, in terms that whatever the sort of estimates he was carrying out with him, that this much time would be required to, of course, oust all of the Gazans out of Gaza and capture Gaza and occupy it. And of course, this genocide was his plan, and that plan was being carried out. But now, after 9 months, of course, he himself and his cabinet, they have started realizing that the plans which were designed in the beginning, they are not being fulfilled. So they are coming up with widening the conflict, so that more and more countries are getting involved, and that in that context, of course, the diversion can be, of course, shifted from genocide at the hands of Israel of Gaza, from that to, of course, call it a war. They want to call it a war because right now the world is considering it as genocide, not a war, because war is something that is between two militaries.
But what's going on in Gaza is genocide.
It's
what
a genocide. It's a genocide.
Israel?
But they
It is
keep
genocide. It is ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
ethnic cleansing, and of course they have been propagating that it is a war. It's not a war at all, but they want to make it look like a war. That is why they are igniting it in their backyard, of course, Lebanon, Beirut, so that at once everyone starts talking that it's a Middle Eastern war. I think it's too late now, and world has already seen whatever they have been doing since 9 months. To me, I think once more it is going to be a disaster for Middle East on a wider level. But eventually, after they portray it as a war, they will be stopped in obviously coming months. And to me, it feels as if this design of attacking Lebanon, of attacking Beirut, entirely is related to shifting it to the war chapter, and that war when ends, and the conflict when ends, of course, it can be shaped up as the whole thing was a war going on, and even in whatever happened in Gaza, that was part of that war.
Right, I understand.
And
but
the genocide tag can be removed.
Right, but I want to understand the need for that happening, because unfortunately it seems that despite it being called a genocide, it's not like there are any real consequences. And so I want your take, Farrukh, whether or not that would actually help the case in any way, or would actually act as a deterrence for Israel not to engage in war.
Right, Sana, I think that it is not going to work as a deterrence, because we have seen in the past also, whosoever is favored by the West, their bad policies are also ignored. But there is a cost to every war, and we are not merely talking about the damage inflicted upon Palestinians, for that matter, or even other Lebanese people or elsewhere. Look at what it does to Israelis themselves.
Yeah.
Remember, yesterday I spoke about this loop of radicalism, where a politician goes to the place where nobody has gone before, because it was thought to be a taboo, or it was thought to be a bad thing. But every time he goes, he expands that circle of radicalism. And because of that, more people flock to that place, and they keep on doing it. And simultaneously, that recently when certain Palestinians were captured by Israeli forces, a hard right Israelis actually invaded their space to actually reach those people and to punish them. So that is breakdown of law and order as well. Reminds me of one quote from Harry Potter again, where you know, Dudley, Dursley and Harry Potter are sitting in front of each other. And you know, Dumbledore actually goes to rescue Harry Potter, and he says that you ignored Harry Potter and you did a lot of harm, but thankfully you did not harm him as much as you harmed your own son, right? So at this moment what seems is that Israelis are also losing it. So what happens? That means that a country is either going to be apartheid state and people are going to be proud of that, or totally inhumane, and usually it turns inwards. Remember that there was a Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, who was killed by an Israeli himself. So this is one aspect. But what you are looking at, I mean, people are averse to calling it what it is, but frankly, it is a mini Holocaust that is going on in Gaza, right? Fact is that just because you have been a victim doesn't mean you can't be a victimizer. Especially because what was happening in Europe and what was happening in Israel were two different stories, and here the state structure was always geared towards you know, capturing more space and dislocating the people who were there. Those people are literally called in the past and even now as some kind of, you know, I don't want
lesser human beings.
Not even lesser human beings. Some kind of, you know, other creatures who an infestation for that matter, and that needs to be cleared. And by the way, there are very good reportage in the Western media that actually covers how West Bank, Gaza, and Golan Heights are being treated by Israeli government. And you see that there are automatic rifles there, and they are meant for only one thing, to disperse crowds around the places that they have actually created as their fortresses. So with that kind of a state of affairs, Israel is going to become a problem in the world. Not today, perhaps, tomorrow, perhaps, or day after tomorrow. Similarly, for other countries also that are allowed, because they are allies of the West, they are allowed to have a carte blanche. They are also, the tail is now wagging the dog. What was getting rid of Biden about? It was that two leaders of two countries, India and Israel, did not want him there because they hated him, right? And they got rid of him. So similarly, so much else is going on, and that's the problem. When in 1930s, Hitler was rising, at that time, the actual boogeyman was like today's China. It was Russia, Soviet Union. And that's why they allowed Hitler to grow. And once he grew out of you know, proportion, it became a problem, and that man ended up killing so many human beings. So this is my fear, that if this blind spot remains, what it will do to international law, Western related world order, and eventually humanity, that is going to be a worrying thing, because now you have AI, you have nukes, and a combination of AI and nukes as well.
Absolutely. This is something that, of course, I hope the world takes seriously. Thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate. That's all that we have from the discussion. We'll now see you tomorrow.